brutality and other forms of state violence in the wake of travel bans and immigration raids in the US. So there's this interesting shift from identifying and reporting on racism in the public by members of the public to members of the state, as in the police and other state agencies like immigration bodies. One example is Copwatch, designed by the Toronto-based activist group, the Network for the Elimination of Police Violence. This allows citizens to monitor and record police interactions with people. This model has been more recently adopted by an Australian initiative in the same name by the National Justice Project. So the Australian version of Copwatch aims to combat over-policing of Aboriginal communities. And this has emerged in the context of what I said before, which is a very long history of institutional violence against young Aboriginals and repeated efforts to remove legal protections against racism in the Australian legal context. There's also another app, which a very interesting one I discovered recently, called Redad Alertas, mainly targeted at Hispanic communities in the United States. Red Alerts, it stands for in English. It's a web app and an SMS service, which is created by a freelance developer, Celso Miles, and it uses crowdsourced witness accounts to warn undocumented Americans of an imminent immigration workforce raid. So in these, the state and the security apparatus are identified not as a source of protection and justice, but as its source, the source of racism itself. So the absence of trust in police and in legal protections has many implications for the credibility of formalised reporting apps. And this points to a very key challenge for these apps, but also for anti-racism strategies more generally, when they rely on the very same systems in which institutional racism plays out. So despite all of these issues, Alana and I feel that mobile apps for anti-racism do have a lot of capacity to address the many different contexts and interpretations of racism. And one of the things that they have in their favour is their ability to respond to acts of racism in real time, and also to have those geolocated, to have them mapped. As I said, this was an initial study, and we have plans to develop and expand the project and to turn our attention to some of these other key concerns. The next stage of our research, we plan to focus on usage context, so understanding who's using the apps, how do they feel, what is their experience of reporting, particularly if they are reporting after having experienced an incident of racism themselves or as bystanders, witnesses of events, of incidents of racism. And we're also interested to look at the data that is being generated by these apps over a long period of time. So this is something that applies to all digital media use. You know, we are all users of digital media. Every time we use a program on the internet or a mobile app, we are creating data, and that data is usually not used by the anti-racism organisations. It's usually used by the companies that make those apps, or Apple iTunes, Android for Google Play. But we believe there might be some use for that data as well for purposes of research and for understanding patterns of racism in different national contexts. So we'll be turning to looking at digital methods for researching data in the future. So if you're interested in finding out a bit more about some other resources on anti-racism in Australia, we have a list here. Very happy for you to take a snapshot of those. And I'd like to finish with a few questions that we might be able to open up for further discussion. How is racism understood in Japan, and how does it manifest? Who is most impacted by racism in Japan? What are the indicators to use to identify racial discrimination in Japan? What are the laws and policies to counter and protect against racism in Japan? What do you think is the role of the media in racism in Japan? And who is involved in anti-racism? We've got two people here. And how is this organised? So I don't know, very happy to just open it up generally to questions, or we can use these as prompts for further discussion. So thank you very much. Gosecho arigatou gozaimashita.
Thank you so much. That was really, I have so many questions, but I'm sure people have questions.
Yes.
But I really like your questions that you prepared for us.
Thank you.
It's going to force us to think about, what is our situation in Japan. So maybe we can start with, if any of you have any questions for Dr. Humphrey.
Can I?
Yes.
I just wondered, you referred to Islamophobia Watch in Australia.
Yes.
And after reported from the victims, and I wonder who and how solved those problems
Yes.
reported afterwards. You mentioned the law student or lawyer.
Yes. They process the
Yeah.
reports.
But I'd like to know more about how they do that.
Yeah, so they need to make a decision about whether or not the report can be acted on, and they will make a decision about whether they think it can be whether criminal charges can be laid, if it is. And if criminal charges can be laid, it will be referred to the police.
That's police.
So that's one channel. The other main channel for responding to the reports is making a complaint to the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission, because the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission has powers to be able to act on complaints and make decisions, usually not criminal decisions. They usually will fine or penalise financially the person responsible or the organisation responsible. Often it's an organisation under the Racial Discrimination Act. So they will help formulate the complaint, because it has to be written in a particular way and presented in a particular way to the Human Rights Commission. And likewise, they will help to the police to be able to possibly liaise with the original person who submitted the report to get further information. So they act as an intermediary.
It's different from Japan. In Japan, maybe no police move.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what you say is very interesting, because I have spoken to the staff of IWA, and they're feeling quite frustrated with the police and their how they are responding to those reports. They feel like they need to develop better relationships with the police to take those reports more seriously. So, as I was saying before, I think that link between the media for making the reports and the systems to act on those reports is crucial, because if the police don't act on the reports, then all they have is the information, but they don't have any mechanisms to redress racism through the justice system. So that information is very powerful. It can be very powerful in itself, but for individuals who have experienced, either verbal or physical assault or abuse, the information itself is not justice. So it's still an ongoing area of development. You know, I wouldn't say that it's all rosy in Australia. The police, all these organisations are trying to build relations with the police so that they will take the reports more seriously and act on them. But I don't think it's really just up to the organisations themselves to have to demonstrate the validity of that act. Part of the problem in Australia and also in France is that Islamophobia is not taken seriously. Even though the Human Rights Commission has come out recently and said that it's a big problem. And in Australia, you know, the Muslim and Arab Australians are the current focus of most racist attacks, and also in Aboriginal Australians. But there's been a history of other migrant groups also being the target of racism. So, you know, and that continues to today. But the group that is most impacted at the moment are Indigenous Australians and Arab and Muslims. So I think that your point is a very interesting one, because how those reports are
the connection
handled is really crucial.
We, Eric also have an investigation or search on racism against international students.
Yes.
And we get information like, say, for example, there is a student from other countries and talking in their language on transportation, public transportation. Then they got kicked or like grabbed hand. But then we have a problem here in Japan because we don't have any laws or system which bans discriminations. So we are now discuss how to manage the problem.
Yes.
So I just wonder how they do in Australia.
Well, I think that in Australia there's two main channels for you know, acting on the racism.
Let me write down the police and human rights.
Police and the
police
is the one. So if it's a criminal charge,
and
human rights equal and equal of EOC.
Human Rights Equal Center. There are two institutions to deal with.
That's right.
Racism legally. And there is an act. It's a civil law.
Racial Discrimination Act.
Discrimination Act. There's a law.
And this organisation is responsible for making sure that this act. You know, so they have commissioners, and the main commissioner is the racial commissioner. Yeah, there's a racial commissioner as well. Dr. Tim. It's pronounced it's Suftoman. I've got it here.
Let's for YouTube people.
Sutpamasan. Dr. Tim Sutpamasan. He's the racial commissioner in Australia, and they can penalise financially organisations and individuals if they believe that and they have in a number of cases, quite a few cases, including racial vilification. So just on speech, not just physical, verbal incidents, but also speech online and through the media. There was a very famous case of a media commentator, a radio host, Alan Jones, who was fined quite heavily because of some very defamatory language used, insulting language used about Aboriginal Australians. So there are some it's the 18C and 18D are the two laws in the 18C and 18D, and very, very controversial at the moment. Parts of the government are trying to get rid of or change that act, to water it down, to make it weaker.
So, basic question, is HREC a governmental organization? And independent, but it's independent from police department?
Yes, and it's also independent from the political party that is in government. So it's like the public service. It's independent of the government in power. It has continued status regardless of who is in power. Yeah.
Who made it? Or
it originated, Gough Whitlam in 1975 originally set up the Racial Discrimination Act, and then the Human Rights Commission in 1975. There's a very good resource, actually. If you go to their website, there's some very good resources on the history. Australian Human Rights Commission. They also have a rights app themselves. I was going to mention this, actually. It's an interesting app. I want to do some further study of it, but it mainly has all of the international convention, UN convention rights in the app. So it would be very good for a lawyer, but probably not for anybody else.
How many people use the applications?
Yes, well, the
Islam.
The IWA one has been going for about 12 months now, and they have about 250 reports so far. So that's quite a lot. It's quite a lot, but it wouldn't be all of the cases of racism. So it would only be a small number of all of the cases of racism reported, because there are other reporting mechanisms on the website, as well as the fact that many people don't report. So it would only represent a small proportion of all of the incidents of racism.
Do you know how many people actually download it on their phone?
No, not at the moment. I don't have those. That would be interesting. This is the data that we're working with the organisation now.
Is it confidential data?
Some of it is very confidential, yes. They don't release any of the names of the reporters. It's all anonymised. But we're working with the organisation now to try and get access to the data that they've collected, de-identified, just to find out, how many reports have been made, how often, where, those kinds of... This is the data that I think is most useful, actually, because it tells you so much about the patterns of racism. So
I wonder if there are some false reports until now.
False reports?
I think it's possible until...
They have to... There can definitely be false reports, but they would be discovered quite quickly, because when they are handed over to the police have to verify the information. Same with the HREC. They will verify the information, so they won't act only on the report. The report will be the source of action, but it won't be the source of evidence. Yeah.
And are there some kind of bias within users, by age or culture? Or
that would be interesting. Yeah, I mean, there could be. I don't know if there would be, I think not so much bias, but rather that the application would be used more heavily by some ages and some groups more than others. So even though it was originally designed for women who are very much the source of racism in Australia, Alana and I have some questions about how many women are actually using the app because of levels of confidence and digital literacy in using the app, and also issues of safety. If you are are you in a safe environment when you're using the app? Maybe not. Maybe you have to go home first and then record the incident, or somebody records it on their behalf. So all of this definitely needs to be, I think, researched further to find out what are the patterns of use, how effective is it, what does it tell us about racism in Australia. But I think it's very promising as a source of data, as a source of new information.
I think since many people have bias, the law students and lawyers commit the project. And I also wonder, do many law students want to do do you commit to the IWA project?
Like, do they commit to it? I think that's a good question, because how sustainable is it? About sustainability? A lot of these organisations don't get any funding. They're not-for-profit organisations that run on a very small budget. If they